Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to tell you that the more I talk about our resource person, the less it is. He is, in short, I will present a very short bio of him, and the rest, the gentleman himself would do all the talking. Professor SUBORNO Bari is a person who is of 12 years old, but is a legendary intellect. He is the youngest professor of the world. Professor SUBORNO Bari has been acknowledged by the former President of the United States of America, Barack Obama. Nobel laureate Kalyan Satyarthi has given him the title the Global Child Prodigy Award. He is not just a professor in physics and sciences, but also is an author who has beautifully authored 2 books called The Love and Manish. And let me tell you, at this mere age, who has got only a decade of his life, has delivered in more than 100 universities of the world, and he is called the Einstein of the current era. Sir, we are truly honored to have you. Thank you so much. Without any opportunity to welcome Professor SUBORNO Bari and to the dais, and request our Managing Trustee Sirajuddin Ajmal Sahab, the Honorable MLA of Binakandi and former MP of Borpeta, to felicitate our youngest professor in a very loving Assamese traditional way with a gamusa, a jati, a Hojai, a flag, and of course a token of love from Ajmal Foundation with an Ajmal perfume. Dear students, he is the youngest professor, a scientist. So, a standing ovation for our guest, Professor SUBORNO Bari. And an applause, the vibration of which we shall carry back to New York. Welcome, Mr. Bari.
All present from Ajmal Perfumes for you.
I will now take the opportunity to invite Mr. Rashidul Bari to the dais and request Mr. Jahidul Haq Chaudhary, the manager of Ajmal Foundation, to kindly come up and felicitate Mr. Rashidul Bari.
So, does anybody know what a scalar is? Raise your hand if you know what a scalar is. Nobody? You guys are not going to pass the table. So, what is a scalar? Well, essentially, it's just a value. Okay. Can anyone raise their hands? Does anyone know what a scalar is? Okay, maybe it's a...
Over there.
Oh, okay. It's a few people, maybe. But it's not a majority of the audience, so I'm going to have to explain it. So, a scalar is essentially just one value. It's just something like 3 or 7. Or 191. Can anyone give me a few more examples of scalars they can think of? Anyone raise their hands if they want to answer that? Anyone? Raise your hand if you want to answer that question. I know, man. I'm trying to facilitate audience participation, so if you would please raise them high. No one can think of examples of a scalar from what I've given. Can everybody see the wall? Oh, okay. There's one guy in the back over there, so. Okay. Whole numbers is a good start, but the thing is, a scalar is just any number. So a scalar is just a singular value. It can be anything on the real number line. It could be in this direction or in this direction. So it could be negative pi, or it could be e, or it could be the square root 2 to the square root 2 power. Doesn't matter what it is. That's what a scalar is. So, a scalar is just any real number. But now, let's move to the concept of vector. Does anybody know what a vector is? Raise your hands. Okay, I see somebody. So can you keep your hand raised so I know where you are? Okay. We see, should be somewhere over there. Okay. Great. That's the textbook definition. Alright. So that's not exactly what I was looking for, but we can work with it. So it of course has magnitude and direction. And how do we describe the magnitude and direction? Well, the magnitude is just the length of the vector, and the direction is what angle it's pointed at with respect to the x-axis. So, we can actually specify these using the components of a vector. So the components of the vector are essentially the lengths of the projections of the vector onto the x and y axes. So this blue line right over here is the x component, and this green line right over here is the y component. So we write it like this, x comma y. And of course the length using the Pythagorean theorem is simply square root of x squared plus y squared, and this is simply arctan of y over x. So we know what a vector is. At least we know what a vector in 2 dimensions is. But in general, a vector is just any array of numbers. It can be a catalog. Of course, it can't be an infinite catalog, that's just to say, not a vector. But it's just a catalog of numbers. 4, 7, 3. And the same number can, of course, repeat twice. Now, of course, this is an 8-dimensional vector, so obviously I can't draw it. But we all know what a 1-dimensional vector looks like. This is just a scalar. A 2-dimensional vector is something I've just demonstrated. And a 3-dimensional vector is quite easy to visualize as well. You just draw the 3 coordinate axes, x, y, and z. You get the x coordinate, you get the y coordinate, and you get the z coordinate. And that's the vector. So, this can keep going past the 3rd dimension into any dimension we want. So, the best way to specify a vector is just going to be v. And to show that it's a vector, we're going to draw a little arrow sign on top of it, because vectors usually look like arrows. So, this vector is just an array of numbers. Now, how do we know which, let's say we want one specific component of the vector. Like, for example, in the vector 2, 5, say this is vector v, we want to specifically obtain this number, 2. Does anyone know how we get that number? Anybody? Raise your hand. How do we denote the x component of the vector? This lecture is going to be a lot longer than I expected. Nobody knows? Come on, don't be scared to answer questions. It's not like you're going to be wrong all the time, right? And of course, being wrong is anyway how you learn. Anybody? Oh, okay. Yeah, you have to.
In the rectangular coordinate, I denote the x coordinate by using unit vector. This is my guess.
Yes, okay, that's a good start, I guess. But what I was more saying was, how do we get the 2 in specific? And of course, as he said, this can be denoted like this. But that's not going to apply to n dimensions. So instead, what we write this as is Vx. But here's the problem. Eventually, at some point, we're going to run out of letters. There are only 26 of them. So just use Greek letters. But there are only 24 of those. So just use Hebrew letters or something. But there are only 30 of those. At some point, we need to generalize it. So what's the only thing that doesn't run out? Numbers. So since the x component is the first component, we're going to denote it instead as v sub 1. Thank you.
I have a doubt.
Yes.
You are using a lot. You are using numbers a lot, but I don't know the actual meaning of actual definition of number. Yes.
Okay, got it. So we have this vector 2, 5, which we are going to define in the coordinate plane. Of course, 2 is just going to be the x component right over here, and 5 is going to be the y component. By the way, a side question. What standard are these students in? Oh, okay. Alright, sure. So, we have this vector right here, which goes 2 in the x direction and 5 in the y direction, right? So, then, if we want to access the x vector, the x direction, we then have this component right over here, vx. And here's what we're going to do actually. Instead of using letters, which we also run out super quickly, instead we're going to use numbers. So x is the first component, x is the first coordinate, so we're going to call it 1, and y is the second coordinate, so we're going to call it 2. So vx becomes v1, and vy becomes v2. This is just so we can generalize it past the second and third dimension into however many dimensions we want. Alright, so